Hi, I'm Paul Verschoor, and together with my colleague Ferdinand von Siemens, we are speaking today with Alexander Nuyken about collaboration in large scale financial transactions such as mergers and acquisitions. Alexander is a partner at Ernst Young, where he leads life science strategy and transactions for Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa.
Would you, as a start, it would really be helpful, I think, if you situate a little bit your expertise by giving us like a very short summary of where you're coming from, your career development, and how you ended up where you are right now with your experience understanding of collaboration.
Yeah, so maybe first of all, I can start with my career path. It is really not a straight line, I would say. The only continuum is life sciences. That's everything else is basically a, a little bit looks like a random walk, but it adds up to a certain pool of knowledge and experience that's very valuable today. So I started out as a lawyer. I'm a lawyer by training, not a scientist. But by coincidence, basically my first transactions were life science transactions. But it was not my choice. It was just kind of given as a first task, selling a life science business, and then thereafter another one, and thereafter another one. So it piled up that I got very interested in this. Then after a few years, 2.5 years of being a lawyer, I switched in banking through the catalyst of an MBA. So I did the MBA in Fontainebleau, a short program, 10 months, and then I basically entered into the banking world at Lehman at the time. That was when I joined it, a thriving firm, very eager to grow and hunt in the market, very successfully so. So 2006, far away from the financial crisis. And then in 2008, all the engines stopped all of a sudden. I was involved in great deals, very interesting experience, very intense time, very many sleepless nights. So that was a super experience, but it stopped all in 2008 when the world changed and Lehman went bankrupt. I was lucky to then be taken over by Nomura, the Japanese investment bank. So very different culture, very different approach, but they were keen to include or integrate the Lehman crowd, and so we had a second life after Lehman. Then later I moved on to UBS for another 3-4 years, and 2015 I joined EY. And the ask to join EY, first of all, I was quite skeptical, saying, okay, I've done a lot I've gained a lot of transaction experience. I'm a banker to some degree, a lawyer. Yes, I can combine those two worlds. But for me, the accounting firms were always doing the financial due diligence, which is not my cup of tea. So I was kind of skeptical what to do there. But there was an interesting proposition they came with. They said, we know very much what we can do. We are very much self-centered around our competencies, but we don't really know or we are less good at knowing what our clients really need, want, and to bring a holistic perspective on to the table. So not talking about our competencies, but more talking about the opportunities in the market and how to capture them with a joint offering, and really connecting the dots. And that was a very appealing proposition to me, because it's I can bring in my expertise on the sector, my previous knowledge, my network, and combine a lot of elements throughout the career that I collected. So I joined EY then in 2015, and since then I'm running the EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa. So pretty diverse and broad sector or broad geography. The health, science, and wellness, how it's called here now, sector. So that includes pharma, it includes medtech, it includes consumer health. So all sorts of different areas. And on top of it, it also includes healthcare. So that's healthcare services, hospitals, provider, payer organizations, which is not so much my area of expertise. But given the broad perimeter and given my role being based out of Frankfurt, running a team that is based in London, even before Corona and before we stopped being able to meet in person, I was already very, very, very intensively working remotely, working connected across regions, and developing collaborative approaches that were new to the firm also, because originally the approach was very much centered around an individual with a franchise, with a team underneath, all sitting together at the same place. And the beauty of the organization is we have so much competency in various areas that are combined much stronger than separated and on individual pockets, and combining that, bring all of that together, and bring that to the value of the client. That's basically my task and my journey here. So
Alexander, thank you for that summary, right? But there's a lot of elements in this, and a lot to unpack. No, so maybe as a start through this whole trajectory, what do you see as the patterns of collaboration? If you would give a characterization of how you see collaboration in these different domains where you're active. So not only you and your team, but also you and your clients, you and different industries that you might want to bring together. Is there a pattern to what you might want to call collaboration in that context?
Yeah, I think the key element or the first step is really to get an understanding of the different interests, and align on goals, or how we call it, on purpose, on the joint key factors that make people drive and pull the whole carriage in the same direction, because that's the center point for being able to collaborate, really. Otherwise, you are having loose ends, or people, in a worst case, even pulling the string in different directions, and that's really bad and not a good start.
We were talking about common goals, right? You said, look, you have to identify the common goals, but now in the complex structures you're in, common goals could vary depending on the operating level, right? The common goal of, let's say, a manager you deal with or a legal expert you deal with might be different from the more abstract goal of the organization itself. So how do you then define those goals?
Yeah, I think the key is to acknowledge the multiple facets of it, like you described, right? So the question is, can you combine all the different ambitions, goals, intentions into one aggregated bigger thing? That's basically the purpose of us doing something together, of an organization being an organization. Actually, there is some bigger goal behind it, and if you can crystallize that, identify that, and then break it down into different elements that are supporting this, and then ideally get people excited about the bigger goal, but recognize that, for example, a smaller goal is my next paycheck, right? So this all needs to tie together and be consistent. If you are creating contradictions in between, it doesn't help you. So being not an inclusive, not diverse environment, excluding people, or things like that, that's all distraction and not helping to service the purpose and align people behind your goal. So this is very important, that you have this bigger picture vision that you can transport, and people are aligning behind it.
Mm-hmm. So that collaboration on the one hand, you say is defined, characterized by the sharing of goals,
Yeah.
right? And but are there other defining features?
What do you mean by other defining features? I mean, the goals can be multiple faceted. It can be pay. It can be.
If we take goal as one feature,
Yeah.
another goal might, for instance, be, let's say, communication, or it might be trust.
Oh yes, of course. I mean that needs to be. Communication is extremely important. I think to transport the goal, to align people behind it. In particular, when you're working remotely in different geographies, communication is the key element. And at the moment, it feels a little bit in COVID times that we are chasing our own shadow by lining up call after call. But to get people who are sitting in a completely different place, in a completely different setting, with very different individual experiences, how that setting works for the one, for the employee who is alone in his 20 square meter apartment, sitting there for 2 years in lockdown is a different experience than, for example, for myself with a full house of kids and family around me, that where you probably are less dependent on external contacts. Let's put it that way, right? So everyone has a different experience there, and you need to acknowledge that, and you need to kind of communicate in a way that you get the buy-in and the engagement from the various parties. And in the old times, I just anecdotally, when you got the idea of a joint project and starting something, the first question of some colleagues was, "What's in for me? So why should I do this? How much can I earn with it, etc." I think that's the wrong start for that conversation, because I mean, ultimately, that's an important question, but I think it takes out a little bit the spirit of where we want to go with the organization or with the collaboration, and that's something that took me a while to understand how to get that, how to make that happen, that people are not asking the first question, "What's in for me?" but how do we, what's the overarching goal? Why do we discuss this collaboration in the first place, etc. And then ultimately it needs to work for everyone. It should not be a loss-making proposition for any individual involved, right?
But then you bring it back to goal again, right? But communication, for instance, communication is often highly structured in organizations, and to get the buy-in of all the layers of such a structure might require also a very specific approach towards communication that is serving those goals. So do you also see that you do that you structure the communication process to also serve this idea of building a sense of common goal?
Yeah, and I think the way to structure this is it's a process, right? It's not that I have the idea of how it looks like and then basically infiltrate the team and dump it on the team. It's an evolution, and it's a process that has lots of iterations and lots of joint thinking and out of the box thinking, how to make this happen, how to evolve it. It's also try and error to some degree, right? So you fail on certain things you undertake, and then you ask yourself, why did it fail? Why did I not get the buy-in from my counterparty? Why did he not support this? For me, it was absolutely logical that this is the right thing to do, and then you get pushback. So you need to ask yourself, what's driving the other person? Why is it not feasible to do it this way? And how can we make it work?
But then, in that respect, so that means you have a very, if you want, customized approach to the communication, and then a third dimension that speaks that is of course trust, because if you try to bring partners together and also deal with this multi-level structure of their organization, there are many links of trust that you have to engineer or also assess. So
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think when I joined the organization, it was initially the banker coming into this environment. Bankers are sharks, and they are not really regarded as very collaborative and team able or whatever. So I had to overcome a degree of skepticism, and I think the way I solved it. It's maybe there's better ways to do it. I don't know, but the way I solved it, I choose the battles where it looked to me like there's more promising to get collaboration going. So I didn't try to run through the wall where people were reserved and not inclusive and said, no, we don't mess up with this account. We don't want you here. I choose I choose opportunities where I could create positive examples, and I firmly believe in leading with examples. So really living the way as an example for others to follow, and then hopefully people buy in. And over time, I must realize this has been quite successful. So people start seeing the successes, seeing how it can working together, and we get more out of it. So why not trying it as well with this guy? So this is a little bit
That's interesting, right? Because you take the trust challenge very much as you as a trusted mediator, right? How do people trust you as mediator? Which of course is a necessary condition to get anything done. On the other hand, you have to bring parties together that might not trust each other a priori, neither all the players within an organization, right? So now it's your task as the mediator to have people also trust each other, so the common goal can be achieved. So do you approach that in a systematic way, or do you also leave that to the organizations themselves?
No, I think the way we developed it from there, so basically first was creating a few examples, but then trying to systematically scan the market for where can we create additional cases like that. So how do we, because it's in various geographies. I created my first positive examples in the Nordic region, so I had a few very successful and very positive experiences working with the colleagues in Sweden and in Denmark. And then I ventured out into other regions to replicate that example. So basically saying, look, it worked very well working together. Here's the outcome. This is how we achieved it. And this is working successful. You get just in deal terms or in transaction terms, that's my home turf. You get bigger deals, bigger fees, you get better outcome. You really create relationships with the client that are lasting longer. You get all sorts of other services included into the mix. So you really can create a franchise jointly. And that was, if you just tell them in theory that this can work, people are skeptical. They have done it a different way over years. And why should this guy who is coming from the outside be able to change that? But if you can pinpoint to certain examples that really brings it to life, how it could look like, how good looks like in that term, then people are getting curious and want to have the same. And so people start approaching. Instead of me pushing at closed doors, it's more than that they invite me then to join and replicate this. And this is then taking place in France, in Spain, in other countries where people realize, okay, there's value in working together.
Okay, but that's if you want so far we looked at it very much from a positive reinforcement perspective, right? Like you bring people together because they share goals, and because they can achieve common outcomes that they would all value positively. But the difficulty, of course, of these situations is that there are also conflicting goals, and there are also conflicts in communication, there are conflicts in objectives, and then the positive approach might not always work very well because people just look at the world differently. Now, how do you approach these more conflictuous situations? How do you resolve them? Is it always about bringing people back onto the path of the common goal? Or are there also negative elements then part of the interaction that you say, if you don't do this, we fail?
Look, I think it very much depends on the universe or the environment you're operating in, and how you can sanction misbehavior or whatever. So if I look back into banking times, it was very easy. It's like it's a little bit organized like an army. You have the general on top, and then a lot of people marching with marching orders, and they know they are given a task. They know the direction. If they fail to achieve it, or if they work not basically in the sense of what has been given as a task, they usually very soon lose their role in the organization. So that's very easy. In a partnership, it's not like that. You cannot enforce things. In particular, if you are not in a legal sense the boss of any of those people you are working with. Yeah, so you are more like a peer, and you need to make other peers realize that it's an advantage working with you. There's no much sanction. Of course, if someone is misbehaving consistently and not collaborative, etc., on the long run he will fail, even in a partnership. But as an immediate way to get people going, there is not so many sanctions you can do. You can just, and that was a learning I took from one of my mentors when I joined. He said, identify the 10-20% of people who are really leading, who really want to lead this in a certain direction, who are willing for the change that's needed, who embrace this opportunity working with you. There are 50-60% of the rest of the organization will follow, and there will always be the rest that is never going to follow because they don't want to, they are not able to, they then leave them behind. It's not that the organization will change, and you need to identify those who are willing to embrace the change. And I took that very seriously. I don't think it's worth spending or wasting your time on battles you cannot win. People ultimately then self-select to be not part of this journey. And if they self-select not to be part of the journey, and you will see that ultimately in their performance, in their numbers, and they will fail. So probably not worth spending too much time trying to pull them also into the same direction.
In the fold, right. Now, do you think that also culture is a relevant factor in this for you, or because you are dealing with a huge swath of territory from Scandinavia to Africa? So, is culture an important dimension on which you would approach collaboration across these regions?
Not really. I think the beauty of our organization, we are a global organization. We are present in so many cultures. I've been working with people in Saudi Arabia. I've been working with people in UK, in Germany, in Africa, in India. They all have different cultures, but the culture, if we want to be successful as an organization, we need to accept certain cultural differences on the one side, but we must not compromise on our values, on our standards. So even in countries where it's harder to navigate with a Western European mindset, let's put it that way, and where the country as such is less liberal, we need to find ways within the firm to stick to our values and live our values. And without creating too much of a contradiction to the local setup. Yeah, so it's a fine line, but it's very important that, for example, we are in Saudi Arabia. We are an employer of probably as many women as men. Yeah? And of course, we appreciate and acknowledge local differences. So we have working spaces that are reserved for women only if they don't feel comfortable working next to men, etc. That's a cultural thing. You would not see that in Germany or in other places, but that's the fine line. Acknowledge local differences, but don't compromise on what we do and how we do it, and have core values that are globally the same.
Mm-hmm. But that's interesting, Alexander, right? Because in some sense, we have moral norms because we are part of broader collaborative processes that form our society. And that's also what you say, right? You try to also adhere to those norms, even if there are cultural challenges to those, or let's say regional challenges. But that might also mean that there is a point of contradiction that's just not sustainable anymore, and that you would have to choose to either proceed with a project and compromise your norm or give up on the project. So how is that balancing act realized?
So our policy is to not compromise on our values. So if they have a conflict there, then we rather not do a project, even if it would be a highly profitable project. That's very clear. Is that something that we live in every situation? I cannot tell because I don't have visibility on that, and I'm not part of that. I'm not at a level where I have visibility into that. I can only tell from my immediate environment that luckily I was never in such a conflict yet. But clearly, when it comes to the quality of work, and if we cannot deliver the quality that I have signed up for, and our organization is pursuing or delivering, then we would rather stop the project.
But would organizations like yours or banks that you worked for also have explicit protocols and monitoring processes for that are also effective in those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a very rigorous compliance process that starts with really with an knowing your customer, reviewing the background of that customer to make. For most of the cases where I work with clients, it's not an issue. It's the big names from Bayer to Novartis to whoever, that they are known in the market, and we are working for a long time together. But clearly, if there's a new client, we would clearly look into the background, and then there's a rigorous onboarding process, and for every project that's being taken on, there is a conflict check and a compliance process that is very, very closely monitored, and any concern from a reputational issue or whatever is being raised, and then may end the relationship before it actually has started.
Right. So we looked at it also rather abstract now, right? So sort of general principles and based on your experience and insight. But maybe we can also look at more concrete examples. And I think, of course, the Lehman Brothers example is a very dramatic one, where in some sense you could argue collaboration at different scales sort of was not really sustainable. So, do you see Lehman Brothers as a failure of collaboration, or would you say that was beyond the control of the organization itself?
No, I think in hindsight, and it's a few years back, so certainly the dust has settled on a few questions. But in hindsight, it was primarily a leadership failure. So not acknowledging at the right time that standalone the organization is not set up to survive, given that the organization back then was coming out of a environment where long-term commitments were short-term funded, and the environment on the funding side and the short-term funding was no longer possible. There was huge mark-to-market adjustments on assets that were on the balance sheet. The prop trading activities were basically turning out to be a disaster. A lot of mortgage loans that were of no value at the time. And then you have the margin call, and then all of a sudden your funding explodes or implodes better. So I think that was probably a leadership issue that, I mean, on that level, you should have visibility on the factors that are managing your
risk
and your balance sheet, etc. And that was far beyond my pay grade at the time. So we are just doing what we were basically supposed to, i.e., advise on transactions, and that was in principle a thriving business. It was just the whole setup was not sustainable at the time.
Right, but what is interesting about it, though, is that if we go back to this issue of building effective collaboration through common goals, right? Still, that whole organization had structured itself around common goals that it would have been able to sustain were it not the case that there was a large implosion of the mortgage market. And so in some sense, what is interesting about that, we also look at an artifact of goal setting. So, and it has to be any change in the industries you look at with respect to goal setting, so that these artifacts that are massive disasters can be avoided. Have you seen changes in that?
You mean in the immediate banking environment, or more broadly?
Well, look, to put it more bluntly, you could say, look, the system was driven by monetary gain at any level of organization. And that led also to exactly this very risky structuring of the balance sheet. However, this was the way to motivate the organization and its different members to keep on marching in the army behind that general. Now, so essentially, this was all monetary gain oriented for the members of the organization and the shareholders. And this, in some sense, was one of the key contributing factors to the collapse. So then, of course, we can now start to generalize and say, okay, has that changed? Or are we still facing similar risks? Because in some sense, also the way you describe goals, for many economic entities, it is about value. It's also about shareholder value. So has that attitude towards setting common goals along monetary gain changed since your experience at Lehman Brothers?
I'm probably not in a position to give a general answer throughout the industry. I think clearly regulators have given it a lot of thought what went wrong and how to prevent this from happening again. And there's a balance to find, right? There's the banks are somewhat like fuel to a motor, or like the oil in the engine. It's absolutely needed in order to keep it rolling and going. But I mean, there can go a lot wrong there and you need to give it the right framework. It's clearly an environment that's more monetary driven than any other organization I've been working in before. So law firms in their self-perception are part of the legal system of our Rechtsstaat. I don't know the equivalent word in English, but basically curator of the legal system to some degree. So an important stakeholder. Banks are a similar thing to the economy, right? They are needed in order to finance growth, finance investments, and or ultimately the pensions of millions of people. A functioning banking system. So if you do regulation too tight and prevent them from acting profitably, then we don't have a bank anymore in Europe. That's part of the global setup. So you see that too tight regulation is also potentially damaging. On the other hand, how do you secure that people are acting ethically and not only to their own immediate monetary advantage? To be honest, I can't answer that question.
But you know what? But there's an interesting consequence of this, Alexander.
I was not in a leadership position there.
No, look, I'm not asking you. Okay, we were just having a conversation about these issues from our own perspective. But what you bring up now is, of course, another aspect to collaboration, which is the extra organizational collaboration. Because, as you say, also a bank has an internal structure, has also an internal structure to organize its collaboration and interaction with other organizations of its kind. But it's again embedded in a broader structure of collaborative entities, which we call society. And actually, these also might have opposing goals. And as a result, a society might say, well, look, we have to regulate what these commercial entities do in order to find balance, right? To find enough local incentive for organizations to push ahead and explore, while in the meantime making sure that we don't cause damage. And so how do you see that balancing? Do you think this is something that we have to put in place properly, and that also these commercial entities should contribute to? Or do you see it more as a competition or an arms race between commercial entities running ahead and just exploring, and societies catching up with trying to regulate?
Look, I think there's a balance that's useful for both sides ultimately, because if you're acting in a regulated environment and investment opportunities, for example, are thoroughly tested and checked and tick boxes from a regulatory standpoint. If the regulation is designed in a sense that they want to basically make sure that fraud and other elements are extinct and people are not entering into stupid investments because the risk is beyond their horizon, they cannot evaluate the risk, then I think it's useful because it's creating trust, and trust is a very important element also for the one who is offering the opportunity, the investment opportunity, or the whatever it is, the service, that it is delivered in a regulated, tested, and monitored environment, so that basically people who are doing wrong are early identified and excluded from the market.
Mm-hmm. But you see this as a competitive process between society and commercial entities, or as also a more collaborative project?
I think in that regard, if it's done in this way, it depends really much on the mindset. But if it's done in the way I described, it's collaborative, because it's also in the interest of the organizations subject to the regulation, right? Because it gives you a seal of, okay, I'm part of a regulated environment where people can trust that I'm offering a standardized or systematic offering that people can, without knowing the details, they can trust that this is properly done. while
Mhm.
in a complete kind of free Western style, Western in the sense of cowboy style environment, everyone does what he thinks. How can a normal person who needs to secure the little money they have know where to invest and where not to invest? It's not possible, or which service to buy or not to buy. If there's no common standard and there's no monitoring of the quality, then it's hard, right?
Okay. No, that's very interesting, because that really means that if we want to anchor trust, then trust is also anchored in regulation that a society provides, right? So not necessarily an intrinsic feature of a commercial entity.
No, and that's good regulation. There's also other intentions on some of the regulations. Really, I mean, even in the political spectrum, there. I mean, if I think back on the discussions we had after the Lehman bankruptcy, I think there have been a lot of voices also who have no understanding of the banking market and the banking world, and they rather they were overshooting in their ambitions in order to regulate this, and that was not with the intention to strengthen the local banking market. It was rather sometimes with the intention to rather kill it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's a different approach, and we need to be careful. Not everyone who is raising his voice in that context of regulation is actually doing it to the benefit of the society. They have more a political agenda or whatever. Yeah, and
Right.
that's not necessarily positive.
But now, in your experience, so if you look back also at your more recent projects, what do you see as the factors that lead to the breakdown of collaboration?
So breakdown of collaboration is really when the when the goals or the intentions diverge, and that can happen even during a process, right? So people don't see any value anymore in pulling the carriage in the same direction. They rather want to get some pieces out of it and pull it in a different direction. That's how collaboration breaks down. Very often there's a personal agenda coming to it. Maybe also miscommunication leading to kind of transporting the discussion on a personal level. I think that's the ingredients to make things fail. If people feel they're not recognized properly, valued properly, have their own agenda above the joint agenda, things like that. That's where collaboration breaks down, and people are reacting quite sensitively on these type of behavior or element or factor.
There's also a fragmentation of that goal structure, right? That it becomes more individual goals, so that the opposition gets amplified.
Yeah.
But now, so we're still in this sort of COVID situation, as you also described yourself earlier. Do you think that this period has actually told us something fundamental about how we collaborate? Should we extract lessons from the current period?
Yeah, I think that of course there's fundamental changes in how we see this collaboration evolving. I mean, in the past, you had obviously phone calls, Skype calls, what have you, were possible, but usually people were meeting in person in a conference room. Lots of internal meetings taking place with people you already know, you have seen before, you have a feeling for the other person, and there was a lot of waste of time and resources by getting everyone in the same room in particular if you're working across such a big region. So just a single meeting for an hour per day is already killing the whole day because you are traveling back and forth. I think this is going away now. There will be physical meetings and physical interactions, and they need to be there, where you need to build personal trust. You need to have someone really, you have to look into the eyes of your counterpart to be able to get a feeling for the situation, for the person. I think these tools like which we are using right now is bridging that to some degree, but it will not make personal meetings redundant. In particular, not in a deal environment where you do M&A, where you need to develop a, you need to, some people call it, you need to eat a steak to eat. So basically, you know what I mean? Really building a personal rapport. Yeah,
Right.
that's needed. But in many cases, we will switch to meetings like this one. Yeah. So meetings via.
Alexander, this is a very, very implementational perspective, right? But I could also imagine that if you observe how our governments have been handling this crisis, that as an expert in collaboration, you would think, well, this could have been done better, or this could have been done differently. Do you have that impression? Like if we would have left it to you and your colleagues, would we have been coming out of this crisis sooner?
I don't know. I mean, the issue with the crisis is that no one really had a recipe at the beginning, and a lot was kind of digging in the dark and trying things. And even if you look at the vaccination programs, at the time when the vaccines were ordered, none of them was actually existing as a approved product, and no manufacturing capability was already available at that point in time. So it all had to be built, and you are betting basically on, I mean, on something you cannot predict, because the outcome of clinical trials, for example, is unpredictable. There is some degree of likelihood, maybe, yes, but it's unpredictable. So in essence, where we are today is an outcome of too many factors to say, okay, I would have clearly a better recipe. Maybe I would have been bolder in ordering vaccines. Maybe I would have been faster in implementing certain measures to really distance people quicker. Yeah, fine, okay, but that's all in hindsight, and we are all smart in hindsight, right? So it's very, very hard to tell, even if as of today, and with a little hindsight we have on the crisis, what really would have made the big difference. And we are living in democratic societies with a lot of room for discussion and a lot of margin for error, and marching in different directions. And we, to some degree, have to accept that if we want to retain a free country. You can also rule like in China, but then you know what.
But you know, what's interesting though is that in some sense you also can see that collaboration has not necessarily flourished. I think there's some real highlights, right? I think the way scientists have stepped up to the plate and really delivered is really amazing. On the other hand, at the pharma industry level, again, we start to see a more mixed picture. And certainly for logistics distribution, I think that could have been handled much better. But okay, fine. This is how it is. But now humanity is facing a much broader crisis, which is the ecological crisis we're facing for the planet and also our future generations. So do you believe that humanity overall will be able to ever and on time create global collaboration to really address this very existential threat that's facing us?
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical on that one, to be honest. I think we have a little bit of common sense in most of the European countries in that regard. But looking at the global debate, it's very tough to find common ground. I mean, the argument from emerging countries, be it China or other countries, is clearly that we are coming from a different place, and for us it's more easy to demand restrictions and limit ourselves because we are already developed and they are just on the journey and they have the right to thrive and develop their economy, and they don't want anyone block that evolution, because in most of the case, on a short to midterm basis, it's more expensive to implement environmental protection. On a long-term basis, probably the better option, but people don't tend to think long-term. They don't tend to think in 2 or 3 generations. They may regret by then that what they've done before, and we have a lot of regrets what we've done to our environment here. But clearly, that's not how governments think and tick. And that's why I'm not so optimistic that we get really something achieved on a global scale. And again, if we in Europe reduce our CO2 emission by 2%, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the global scale. So I think it's the right thing to do, but again, on a global scale, I'm a little bit skeptic that we'll really achieve something over the next few years.
But now, if you would have a magic wand and you could change one thing that would allow humans to collaborate better, what's the one thing you would then change?
Oh, it's a tough one. I don't want to give away my wish so quickly without proper thinking. To be honest, I don't really know what's the missing link. Maybe more long-term thinking, more thinking in generations. We are all here just a generation to pass through to the next one what we have inherited, and if we don't, that's probably the biggest lacking thing, that people recognize that they are not here for their own good. And yeah, that would be my wish. Maybe I don't know. I need to think about it.
Good, then I will get back to you on that wish. But I think it speaks to an issue you mentioned earlier, right? That also collaboration breaks down because people don't identify with the common goal, but the common goal collapses into a fragmented set of competing goals. And I think this is very interesting to see, that I think there's a naivete on our side that we believe people has similar education, similar expectations and norms as we do. And therefore, we expect that they might also adhere to our ideas about democracy and fairness and so on. But that's just not the case. And if you are a farmer in sub-Saharan Africa and you are practically subsistence level, should we expect that person to immediately understand democracy and understand fairness and global warming and the challenges that go along with it? So I think there's this huge discrepancy between levels of expectation and knowledge and also appreciation of these challenges, which is asking a lot, I think, from us Europeans, who indeed have profited, of course, more than others maybe over the centuries. But now we're facing all the same challenge. But I think it's really this issue of not being able to find the common goals and communicate the common goals. And what's interesting, of course, if we take your experience as a reference, there you'll see there's this balancing between the goal structure of an organization and the regulation around it. But of course, for global warming, the probability to find regulation that will work globally is very small. So it really has to be intrinsic to organizations. And there we see it actually, or at the smaller scale, that's really difficult to accomplish. So it's a massive challenge. Well, my personal view actually is that just we have to augment human cognition, that our cognitive machinery is not sufficiently prepared to deal with the timescales as you describe, to really appreciate the problem and respond to it properly. But that's another discussion. But humans, of course, evolved to collaborate at a certain scale. I mean, evolution prepared us for running around in the savannah and maybe cooperate with dozens of others and not more, right? So our brain has, in that sense, certain biases and deficits that are not necessarily helping to operate at the scale we have to operate at now.
But that's part of our evolution, I would say. I mean, a few years back, obviously, communication was much more difficult, fragmented, and very much relying on personal interactions, which is not possible at the same scale like we communicate now with these technology where we have video calls, pulling people in from various, and a minute later or half an hour later, I have a call with a completely different setup from completely different continents, and this is basically going in a row. It's a whole day from morning to evening.
I know.
So our brain, I think we are quite adaptive to things. Fortunately,
we are. This is definitely true. So Ferdinand, do you have a question for Alexander?
No, I think it was fascinating discussion listening to you. And turns out that I had noted down some questions, but you've asked them. So I crossed them out.
I'm psychic.
Very interesting.
So, Alexander, I would like to thank you very much for this conversation. It was really very insightful and a great start for our podcast series.
Hi, you listened to one of our podcasts in the series on collaboration, produced by the Ernst Young Forum and the Convergent Science Network. You can find more episodes on our website.